Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Wolf Thijs seminar, the AI wave in defense and what it means for Europe's security industry and the legal landscape and beyond Europe. It is my great pleasure to also welcome two highly recognized experts in this field, one from academia and one lawyer, together with whom we will learn on the current state of play from a technical perspective and discuss legal issues around this potentially game-changing technology in warfare. So please welcome with me Dr. Michael Raska, Assistant Professor for Military Transformations Program with the Nanyang Technology University in Singapore. Good evening to Singapore and the NTU. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
And also warm welcome to a very nice colleague of mine, Dr. Omri Rachum-Twaig. Omri is a partner with Fisher in Tel Aviv, one of the biggest law firms in Israel. He's specializing on technology, cyber, and IP-related aspects of law and business. Hi, Omri.
Hi, good morning.
And myself, I'm Roland Marko, partner in the Vienna office of Wolf Thijs, specializing on tech and data, and have a strong emphasis on artificial intelligence, and the pleasure of being your host this morning or evening, depending on where you're joining from. The webinar platform allows you to post questions, by the way, to the speakers while we're discussing things via the comments function. So please place your questions, and the related names will not be disclosed to the other participants, so no reason to hesitate. We will collect the questions, and hopefully we will find the time to answer all of them towards the end of this approximately 1 hour session. So this session is obviously online and it will be recorded, so we assume you're fine with this if you simply stay online. Thank you. Having said that, we turn towards the discussion, and I refer to the opening statement in our webinar invitation, actually stating that artificial intelligence in defense is no longer a future concept. It is already reshaping the battlefield quite substantially. And I would kindly ask Michael now to be so kind to give us an initial overview on the evolving importance of AI-driven technologies in the various sectors of defense. So please, Michael, the floor is yours.
Mm-hmm.
And I kindly ask you to share your slides that you have kind of prepared for us.
You see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, everything okay? So you can see the slides, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Raska. I'm a assistant professor at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies here in Singapore. I've been here almost more than a decade. And just a little bit about our school. We are a think tank. We advise the ministries of defense here in Singapore and work with the Singapore Armed Forces. And at the same time, we are a graduate school where we train sort of master students. So we have a graduate program with 200 students and focusing on any aspect of international security. And I'm basically in military transformations program, MTP. And MTP is designed to look at the future. So where we look at the impact, the strategic impact of emerging technologies, and think about, what does it mean for future warfare? What does it mean for defense planning? What does it mean for regional and international security? So this is just, many of you, come from a different background. So just want to explain a little bit my background. And again, I'm not a lawyer or I don't have a legal background, but I'm, more from strategic studies. And so what I want to do is to give you sort of a 10, 15-minute overview on how can we conceptualize the AI wave in defense. So I have wrote a co-authored a couple of articles on this, and I also edited volume, and then talked about it for a number of years. And so basically, let me start, with sort of the historical conceptual overview. So we have talked about technology or emerging technologies and future warfare over the last 40 years, or if not even more. If you were having this seminar 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, there's always one emerging technology that excites everyone and that shows ambitious promise, right? So 40 years ago, we would talk about the rise of electronic warfare and impact on the militaries, right? In the 90s, 2000, we talked about the digitization, the IT diffusion, the information technology diffusion, and revolutions in military affairs. And over the last sort of, I would say 5 plus years, we started to talk about more the impact of emerging technologies, the convergence of AI and other technologies, and again, with a huge ambitious promise. Now, what I argue is that this AI wave is fundamentally different from the IT revolutions, military affairs that we talked about over the last 40 years. So let me just sort of explain 3 reasons in a way. So 20, 30 years ago, when we talk about the information technology or the digitization, and many militaries still talk about digitization because they failed to implement it yet, right? Most of that technology was basically outsourced from the West. The United States and Western Europe had that monopoly over advanced technologies at that time. So there was no strategic competition that we have now. Right now, we have, emerging strategic competition for emerging technologies. So it's not only about the US and the West, it's the rise of the Chinese AI wave, the Russians, the Israelis, the Singaporeans, the Koreans, the Japanese. So there are many, many players who have access to emerging technologies and who try to basically leverage on its potential. That's reason number 1, or so that is what has changed. Number 2, what is different is most of the innovation comes from the private sector. So the militaries were traditionally the hub for military technological innovation, but that's no longer the case. All militaries basically now struggle on how do we take the dual use technologies that are basically originating from the commercial private sector into the traditional military hierarchies and structures. And believe me, there is no one military that has figured it out to align the vision, the resources, the manpower, the structures, and leverage it in a very smooth way. So all militaries are struggling. And the third factor that is different, in a sense, is the different relationship between humans and machines and warfare. And I will explain to you in the next slide. But in this same context, so you have a completely new type of emerging technologies. You have new forms of warfare that have emerged over the time. But the AI wave, as we are basically entering, is fundamentally different from the past. And another sort of difference, what is different is the changing geostrategic context. I already mentioned strategic competition for emerging technologies, right? So we are entering what I would call the Star Wars paradigm. And we see increasingly the weaponization of everything, where you see convergence of different technologies creating new types of possibilities, but at the same time you have a convergence of different types of threats that are posing headaches to intelligence, militaries, and security professionals. There's a breakdown of civil military silos, so we don't longer recognize where's the beginning and end of the conflict. We start to talk about sort of the hybridity of warfare of the last 10 years or so. With the AI wave, the hybridity is increasing even further. So bottom line, this AI wave that we are entering right now is fundamentally different from the previous IT revolutions, military affairs that have that we talked about. Now, the key factor that what has changed to me is that the AI wave basically enables the externalization of the burden of war to the machines. So the AI enablers basically convergence of all the other technologies, that are coming online and are coming together in unprecedented waves. So the AI enables, for example, cyber operations. AI enables, detecting cyber threats. At the same time, enables offensive cyber operations. AI enables, the control of autonomous weapon systems, AWSs, right, which can be combined in both physical and digital domains. And AI enables sort of the new generation or the next generation of precision-guided munitions and drones. So this externalization of the burden of war to the machines is one of the key essence of the AI wave. And when we talk about sort of the diffusion of AI wave in the military domain, you see a number of functions and applications. In a way, wherever you can harness the data, and you can apply algorithms, then you can basically try to see how you can leverage it. But generally, military AI can be divided into two big brackets. On one end, you have the administrative functions, right? So you have AI applications that will help you with acquisition and procurement, with R&D and testing, with human and legal resources, with training, logistic, health and medicine, right? Where you have a number of applications that enable you streamline all these processes, the administrative functions, right? To make it, seemingly more efficient, more faster, and understanding, who needs what and when, and sort of optimize the supply chains and basically all the other administrative functions that come with that. But as I would argue, with each sort of technology, with AI application, you also have a number of risks and challenges, right? So when you rely too much on automation, you can have, biases in the data. You have data privacy concerns. You can have, lack of transparency. So wherever, you look at on the administrative side, you have great potential impact, but at the same time, risk and challenges. And I will summarize the risk and challenges in a minute. But more what, I think is more concerning, and this is what we're talking about, the externalization of the burden of war to the machines, are the operational functions, right? And again, AI can be implemented or can be integrated into a number of, operational functions. Right now, the way I see it, I think the tremendous impact of AI is in the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and command and control and communication, sort of the decision-making systems that are out there. So AI can enable you to plan or military operations. It streamlines the navigation, sensing. It brings together data from different sensors, and provides enhanced situational awareness. It provides, targeting, identification. It can provide, intelligence analysis, early warning, predictive maintenance, and you name it. So if you are able to generate, or if you have able to basically have the data, fuse the data, then you can basically apply different machine learning and AI models in there and try to integrate it into military. And again, with each iteration, you will have a number of risks and challenges, and I will summarize them in a minute. But in a broad sense, the way I see it right now is that military and AI is really about the data and about understanding the data and about enabling decision and action of that data. So we try to, so the way, you can think about it, again, you can fuse all the sensing and data capability. You can, it can help you with sort of intelligence analysis. You can use it for predictive analysis, predictive maintenance, and other functions. Less so, again, we see a lot of focus on the autonomous weapon systems and lethal autonomous weapon systems that are enabled by AI. But I think that, the major impact is in the back end into ISR and decision-making systems. And one way to understand this better is what we call the OODA loop. I don't know, maybe some of you have military background, but the OODA loop is a concept that has been developed by Air Force Major John Boyd about 40, 50 years ago. Originally, it was the idea as an interface between a fighter pilot and the machine. So if you were fighting, if you were flying in a fighter jet in a Korean or Vietnam War, right, you were trying to basically orient yourself faster than your opponent. And in doing so, you were able to basically gain decisive advantage. So that tactical concept has then, transformed into more strategic level, where we talked about, trying to gain strategic advantage by disrupting the OODA loop of the adversary. So if you're able to disrupt the OODA loop of your adversary, the orientation, right, you're able to, again, to paralyze the decision-making and create, a window of advantage. So in the past, again, all these OODA loop was basically human-driven, and it was limited. It relied on the individual skills of the pilots, for example, or the commanders, right? It was a human endeavor. So that's why we established, for example, the Top Gun schools, or other sort of schools that try to increase the capability of the humans, right, to maximize the potentials of the machines. Over the last 10 years or so, we see a lot of the tech-enhanced AI OODA loops. Again, I already mentioned this, where AI is able to synthesize real-time data from multiple sources, including satellites and drone feeds. It can basically fuse data from multi-sources into orientation, and it helps, with, decision making, and it helps basically provide decision and action. Now, would I argue that in the future, if you think about 10, 20 years forward, if you extrapolate the process, I would argue we are moving into what I call the autonomous super OODA loop phase, where a lot of these functions will be, completely managed by the machines, right? So would I argue that the observe and orient phases will basically fuse through predictive AI-driven surveillance that will integrate all the cyber and physical domains and adaptive machine learning, and the decision and action is increasingly provided by autonomous decision-making dynamic and autonomous weapon systems. So we are in that unique sort of, I would say, tipping point where tech-enhanced OODA loops or tech-enhanced, machines, are going to be increasingly not only augmenting, but machines going to be increasingly replacing, right, humans in the loop. And a lot of it can be seen, of course, in the current conflicts. The war in Ukraine is a lab, is an experimentation lab for a lot of these systems. On both sides, I think the Russians have learned a little bit later, but the Ukrainians have leveraged also AI system in warfare. I think they're able to, again, they have what they call the Delta AI system, where they were able to basically take snapshot of every Russian asset or unit, and basically created this database that is then put online through Starlink, and the database of the AI basically is Delta. All the drones and other units have access to this, and the last sort of 200, 300 meters, for example, many of the drones are completely autonomous. But it's implementation, again, of that OODA loop, the super OODA loop that I already talked about, where you see a lot of the synthesis between the different sources of data that allows you to have a greater situational awareness and faster decision making, and then rapid kill chain action. But that, of course, creates a number of risks, vulnerabilities, and challenges, right? And we can spend the whole day, talking about this. But I think some of the most important ones from my desk here is about data quality and bias. So all algorithms learn from data, but if the data is, poisoned or biased, then that can lead to unreliable decisions, especially if you have a military crisis. Another big challenge is about explainability and transparency, right? Why did our system do or tells us this, right? So how can we explain, how AI models operate? And this is a big black box. And if you cannot understand it, it makes it very difficult to ensure accountability. Who is responsible? Then you have, of course, challenges for robustness and security. All AI systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks and manipulation, right? And then the operational side, right, where militaries struggle, again, as I mentioned, they often use different systems, but how you integrate it with the legacy systems and the new ones. So you have problems of the hardware infrastructure, and of course, a lot of legal and ethical risks, and Omri will probably talk about them and answer your questions. But from the strategic point of view, strategic studies, we see a lot of fragmented governance. The strategic competition for emerging technologies provides, different standards and divergence in how countries and militaries are thinking about, governing these technologies. So, you have different initiatives and processes. I am myself part of the REAIM, the Responsible AI Military Domain, which is very inclusive, broad process that started 2 years ago in The Hague. There was a summit in Seoul last year, and this year there will be summit in Spain, where again you have different communities trying to come together, trying to come up with I would say a soft law in a way, principles that will govern the use of AI and autonomous weapon systems in military domain. Then you have a lot of regional and national initiatives. Again, a lot of this will change because you have a new administration, for example, in the US, and the US is backtracking from a lot of the AI governance that it's introduced under Biden. And then you have a lot of the industry and civil society initiatives and processes. So all of them are trying to, point to the risks and challenges, but all of them ultimately are not able to, bring into anything sort of binding or anything legally binding that would ensure that, that there is, a code on how to use it in the future. So this is, sort of an overview, and I think we have to talk about, so wherever you sit in your desk, you have to think about what does it mean responsible AI in military defense innovation, and how you can, in order to do that, you have to basically align the thinking about defense AI. You have to start, also adapting into your operational integration. You have to adapt AI technology across, different users. But most of the, cases is not about the technology in itself. It's really about changing mindset and having organizational transformations that enables the institutional agility to use this technology in a most profound way. But understanding the risk and challenges of these technologies as equally important, if not more, than thinking about the potential impact or positive aspects that most defense companies, for example, try to promote. So I will end right here, and I look forward for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for these very interesting insights. We see that AI support in both administrative and operational function in military use is already a reality, and at least as far as I remember my military service, only too well when we stood in line and had to wait for ages to receive our pay in cash. I was inclined to say that maybe I wished for AI support from the administration side back then, at least. But joking aside, the topic is too serious. You concluded that, in your view, the main and key challenge is a fragmented governance and, for the time being at least, a lack of enforceable standards. With a view to Omri, you work and live in Tel Aviv, Israel, and you're experiencing certainly difficult times in that area with an armed conflict just around the corner. It is being said that also in this conflict, the use of AI is a reality already, and we know that also the defense industry, just like the cyber industry sector in Israel, is very strong. And a lot of technology and business is developing out of the local armed forces and services, I guess. So, Omri, in terms of AI governance, Do you agree with Michael that there is a fragmented governance? Do you see a lack of enforceable standards locally, or is it simply a greenfield activity that everybody is free to do and to develop business out and to export maybe also to third countries?
So first of all, hi everyone, and thanks for inviting me. And I think Michael's introduction was fantastic in the sense that it was a very clear taxonomy of where AI meets military operations in so many different aspects. And I mean, I'm both a commercial lawyer, so my perspective is from the commercial, activities related to the development of these type of technologies vis-a-vis defense industries and defense operations. And obviously, Roland, as you said, my position in Israel obviously enhances these questions, given that Israel is both a, let's say, user of various military technologies, also a leading developer of military technologies, but also a hub for commercial technologies and commercial development, civilian development of technologies that are then proliferated globally around the world. And this also converges with the fact that Israel, at least from the civilian perspective, is an export market. So it is not self-sufficient in the sense that it provides technologies for its own self-consumption, rather dependent on the ability to export, to trade, and to have ongoing trade and commerce relationships with other markets. The European Union, obviously, a very significant trade partner, right? Of Israel. But I want to take a few steps back to answer this question, Roland, and maybe rely on Michael's taxonomy to maybe suggest a few key features of the interrelations between AI as a technology and military defense needs and operations that I think is somehow maybe different from what we're used to see in the development of military technologies. So I think a few characteristics that we can clearly see is that, one, it used to be the case that a lot of new technologies are first developed in defense industries, right? In defense industries and operations, especially through periods of armed conflicts or wars, and then proliferated into the civilian market. This is not necessarily the case with AI. So AI is and has been in use in military operations and in defense initiatives for a while. But it seems to me that a lot of the current technology in AI is not necessarily developed within defense industries, rather is preliminary developed in civilian industries, in the commercial market, and then brought back into the defense context, which is different. It's a different trend than what we used to see. This is one key feature. Another one is that I think AI, especially the big LLMs, generative AI, the new AI capabilities of this era are general technologies by nature. So they're not. I mean, the core technology is not defense specific, or not military specific, or not combat specific, which highlights the feature that we sometimes see in the context of defense law and kind of setting policies for defense technologies, which is the dual use technology case, which used to be the out of the ordinary, right? So there were the core military technologies, and then there was kind of the periphery, which is dual use technologies, where we want to regulate them and maybe kind of extend the feature of defense technologies. But here, I think that this is such an important new technology, which is by definition dual use, or even on the contrary, it's by definition general purpose or civilian related, and only if it is then harnessed and used for military operations, then it becomes defense related in practice. This is another, I think, key feature that is different than what we used to see in the development of defense related technologies. And then the third aspect, I think, is that the key challenges that Michael outlined to us, and the key difficulties, the key risks that we see with AI technology are shared in between military initiatives and civilian ones. Because again, these risks and challenges and kind of difficulties that we see with AI are general, are not directly tied to defense operations or to military operations. They are widespread in the market. And this brings us to think about what is the right way to tackle these risks, these challenges, these kind of profound difficulties that we see with this technology, and where should we put our effort in governance, right, and in policy making? Is it strictly in defense-related industries? Is it a more general task, right, to cope with these challenges? This obviously brings to the table the questions on the EU widespread regulation on AI, right? That the EU AI Act that is slowly entering into force, right, over the next year and so. And I think these are questions that we're not used to focus on when discussing defense law, export control laws, the key challenges in using technologies in the battlefield, and I think this raises important policy questions, because any policy decision that we make in this regard has direct effect not only on the battlefield, but also on the general use of this technology, the ability to develop it, the ability to use it commercially, which is obviously a key benefit to humankind, right? We see that in the past few years, and this is going to be exponentially increased in the future. So this raises much more nuanced discussions, especially in the interrelations between what do we want to achieve or to prevent or to mitigate in the battlefield, right, or in defense-related operations, and what are the potential spillovers of that into the general market. And then it meets us, I think, from a commercial perspective. And then as a commercial lawyer, this is, the prism in which I encounter these questions with startups that develop these type of technologies. So they are twofold. One is their general ability to develop technologies and trade them not in the context of defense operations, right? So, for example, if one of our policy decisions would be to be stricter on export control laws or stricter on defense-related laws and expand their scope into all general purpose AI technologies, because these then, feed, right, the military operations, then the potential spillover would be that we significantly restrict general trade, right? So we significantly restrict the ability to trade AI technologies in the civilian market, and that's a dangerous spillover, right? In the sense of enhancing economy, of allowing the technologies to develop. And then on the other hand, if a certain country, let's say the United States, right, understand that it's today the leading force in developing general purpose AI technologies, and decides as a policy decision not to restrict trade on AI, which is basically what the Trump administration is doing right now, including the 10-year moratorium on state legislation on AI, and decides, well, we want to preserve our market advantage in AI globally and allow our American companies, right, to disseminate this technology freely without any regulatory restrictions, then the spillover on the other way around would be that we will have very little ability to control or prevent the dissemination of these technologies into the battlefield in cases where we want to have more control and a more nuanced kind of more balanced approach on how and to what extent we want to use these type of technologies with the risks that Michael mentioned. So this is, I think, my framing of the discussion these days. And it comes down basically, I mean, in the current regulatory sentiment to two different branches of regulation. One is general AI regulation, which we see progressing around the world, the European Union being the leader, right, in developing these new regulations. But not only, I mean, we have similar initiatives in Israel right now, various market regulations by different regulators, from the financial sector towards the privacy regulators, etc. And we see that in other countries around the world. And then the other thread of laws and regulations that are important for this discussion are defense law types of laws and regulations, which basically include export control, which is the international kind of, barriers on trade, but also internal restrictions on dealings. And I assume that we will get to a stage where we see regulations in certain jurisdictions prohibiting the development, right, or the use, even internally, of certain AI technologies that could have defense-related spillovers or defense-related issues. So these are the two kind of threads of law that we see, and these affect commercial players, so tech companies, from startups to the enterprise tech companies, both in international trade. So this is the export control side of things, but also when they want to responsibly and safely provide these type of technologies to government actors, right? So to defense-related actors, both internally in their home jurisdictions, but also externally to other jurisdictions. These are the key practical challenges that we see, and we see that all the time. So we see Israeli startups trying to harness these type of technologies, and they come to us and they seek advice on what they can or cannot do with the technology. And the ambiguity these days, so the lack of clear regulation on what you can or cannot do, makes it very difficult on having a clear concept of kind of risk mitigation and commercial approach, because you don't want to work that hard on developing your new technology for, I don't know, a year, 2, 3 years time. And then at the end of the day, when you want to trade and deal with it, you're getting blocked by the relevant export control regulator saying, well, no, this cannot be exported outside of your jurisdiction. And in an export related, export, prone jurisdiction, this is a death kiss, right, to a startup. So this is my kind of perspective on these issues, and I think from here we can ask kind of more detailed questions on, what are the different considerations, what would be a good regime. I mean, what does existing law exactly say? These are interesting questions, but I think the overarching perspective is important to understand where it takes us from here.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. In the meantime, just a reminder to the audience: if you have any questions, please do post them in the Q&A section of the platform. But taking up what you said, Omri, in the EU, you mentioned the EU AI regulation, the AI Act, which is basically the first legal framework worldwide governing AI systems for a bigger economic area, harmonizing the legal framework and governing how AI can be put into use, and how to deal with the intrinsic risks of this new technology. But maybe not all of us know that the AI Act does not apply to AI systems that are used exclusively, as it says, for military defense or national security purposes. So therefore, in the EU, at least on a harmonized level, there is no product-specific regulations need to be complied with in this respect. And at most, military use is subject to the rules of warfare under international law, which, as we heard from Michael, are not yet very explicit in that. However, in case of dual use technologies, and this is again where there is a quite what concurs to what Omri says, dual use technologies that can fulfill both civilian and military purposes. The AI Act applies to the civilian areas of application. Under certain circumstances, however, the provisions of the EU dual-use regulation, particularly the one as regards digital surveillance goods, for examples, may also apply. So in case of security relevant autonomous or surveillance applications, one would also have to refer to this dual-use regulation dealing with restrictions on trafficking this sort of technology. And this is where also in the European Union restrictions then may apply in monetizing developments of AI systems by developers. Perfect. Looking at the time. Michael, you said AI systems introduce limited algorithmic transparency and increased exposure to digital vulnerabilities and towards the system providers even. You named it a black box. The EU AI Act requires for some information duties towards the users. Is this a feasible concept also in a military surrounding, or do you have any idea how to tackle these specific risks of AI-driven technologies in warfare?
It's a big question. In a sense, you have to. I mean, one way I frame it is from the traditional Clausewitzian point of view. Talk about the fog of war, right? The Nebel des Krieges. Yeah. So I talk about sort of the digital fog of war that is created by AI systems, where we are really facing uncertainty, ambiguity, and potentially even in chaos if we are not able to understand how these machines work or how these algorithms provide, outputs, and that, when and how reliable they are. So militaries are trying to come up with implementing their own principles of governance. So in case of Singapore, you have, for example, safe, robust, reliable, responsible AI that they try to integrate it into the life cycle of these technologies, right? So from the design of that, from the beginning all the way to the end, to the actual use in that life cycle of that, you try to integrate or implement, certain ethical normative principles. And whereas we have defined these principles, and many militaries have defined these principles, the problem is really how you implement it and how you synchronize them across, the developers, users, and producers, right? And that is a challenge. And I think all the defense establishments and defense ecosystems struggle with that. But depending on how agile you are, that's why I talk about this organizational agility in a sense. It's not about the technology, it's about how the organizational defense ecosystems are set up together so they can communicate and they can work together into mitigating this risk. You will not be able to eliminate all of them, but if you can, narrow the gap, and if you can understand where the main risks are, across the different, nodes, then you can perhaps, in theory, mitigate the impact of potential misuse.
Maybe sticking with you, Michael. I'm looking already at one of the questions. A user posts the claims that we will soon experience an AI singularity appear to be unfounded, including the claims that AI would eventually autonomously decide to take control away from humans. But AI applications in the defense area appear to raise a similar risk, humans voluntarily handing over control to AI, and thus AI taking control of war in all of its aspects, from execution to planning and strategy. And if AI proves to be efficient in war, this will lead to more death and destruction combined with less accountability. This is the connecting factor.
Yeah.
And the human side, what kind of legal framework, the user asks, could mitigate this risk?
I think that legal questions I would pose to Omri, but in a sense, you are absolutely right. There is a debate. On one hand, you have, the skeptical school of thought that, again, just like any new technology, it will not be able to change the nature of warfare, only the character of it, and it will, create new challenges and new problems that we cannot really unforeseen that. And then you have the other school of thought who argues, again, what I mentioned in my presentation, that because of the cost of war is just so high that you have the technologies that enable you to externalize the burden of war to the machines, that will, and that because you have access to these technologies that is diffusing at a much faster rate, that means it's going to change fundamentally not only how, what type of weapons are used in conflicts, but the entire defense ecosystems and defense establishments. So you will have to rethink ministries of defense, you have to rethink defense ecosystems, you have to rethink the relationship, the dynamic between, again, the users, developers, and producers. And so creating, this type of new dynamic will, whoever is going to be able to reorganize and figure it out where the synergies are, right? Then in theory, they will have, a greater operational and strategic advantage compared to those who do not. But that comes to the, very important point, and it is that not everyone will be able to achieve that kind of level. So you will have, asymmetric type of responses. Okay, I don't have an AI, military, but I can still negate it or try to figure out a way to asymmetrically negate that technological, potential technological advantage. So the gap between those who have the vision, the resources, and the manpower will increasingly, widen. And at the same time, the gap will be also shaped what Omri talked about, the different zones, different regimes. So you will see, different type of, I would say, zones of influence, the zones of technological influence, where different tech superpowers will have the ability to shape, the normative, the operational, the strategic, diffusion of these emerging technologies. And I think that is very unique. I think that's why we're moving into this multipolar world, in a sense where the West and the US no longer have the technological advantage anymore, right? So the way it was, for the last 60 years, where the US was basically at the apex of military technological innovation, that era is gradually fading because, again, the Chinese, to a lesser degree, Russians are able to catch up, close the gaps, and develop similar, if not better, some of the systems that the Americans and the Europeans have.
And just stepping in here and referring to the question back again, what kind of legal framework could mitigate this risk? Does this new balance of powers, if any, facilitate a new legal framework in your view, or does it exactly do the opposite?
I think there will be a competition for these different legal frameworks, right? So, major superpowers, tech superpowers will have, they take on how they envision the use of these technologies and will try to influence, right, the diffusion of not only these technologies, but how we think about it, how we use them. So I would say, just like the Europe, so you have you have European umbrella in a way that tries to condition the use of the technologies. You have the American umbrella, you have the Chinese, you have other sort of small states, viewpoints on this. So we'll see multiple competing, governance frameworks and influences depending on whose technologies we are going to use. So those who will use the Chinese technology is likely probably subscribe to the Chinese perception what is legal and what is not, right? Yeah. So there will not be, I don't see sort of major universal, equalized, way, except perhaps maybe at the highest strategic level on the use of AI and nuclear weapons, where the nuclear weapons should not be basically governed by the use of AI. But at the conventional level, I would argue that you will see different, governance mechanisms depending on the type of technologies that you subscribe to.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that. I hope this answers the question. The next one is rather directed to Omri, I'd say. And the user asks that talking about defense OEMs, so original equipment manufacturers, the user noticed that many of them still struggle how to embrace innovation coming from the civilian field, like startups, scale-ups, especially. and that the OEMs will also need a relevant M&A strategy to tackle this issue. So this reluctance, I would say, to onboard third-party AI systems. Question then is, how do you see this, and how can this change in the short or mid-term?
Yeah, so that's, I think that's an interesting question, and I think one of the key issues that this happens is, again, one, the fact that this is an anomaly. We see the technology developing faster, right, in the civilian sector rather than the military sector, and this is, again, something that defense OEMs are not necessarily used to, right, to see around them, and again, touches upon the fact that this is dual use technology in the sense that, let's say that there's a startup, right, that has a technology that either a defense OEM or an actual government actor, right, wants to embrace. One of the key concerns for the defense sector would be that this startup would not be able to deal, right, with the same technology with other adversaries, right? But this sometimes directly contradicts the the purposes, the business purposes of the startup. Even and again, even if this, let's say, so previously what we used to see in these circumstances, kind of an exclusive license for defense purposes, right, and then proliferation of the technology only for the defense industry, for the specific OEM or the specific government, and then the startup is probably free to do whatever it wants in the civilian sector. But this becomes much more difficult with AI technologies, because the key, right, benefit of the technology is not the fact that it is now encapsulated in a military-related product, right, or a machine or a robot or whatever, or a weapon, right? It's the core technology itself. And then if the startup wishes to keep using the core technology for other purposes, it still raises the direct competition with the military defense industry. And then, I mean, it would mean for the defense industry to take this technology, it would mean that they would actually need to acquire the entire technology, which makes it more expensive, right? And makes them compete with, other powers that come from the commercial sector and sometimes could offer much more money, right? For these technologies. And what I'm concerned with is that what we will see as a pushback from the government side is restrictions on dealing, right? So restrictions to deal, right? New regulations on export control and restrictions to develop and restrictions to deal, which will make it, not financially valuable for startups to consider selling this technology for civilian purposes, and then lower the price, right, for purchasing the technology for the military sector. We've seen this before in the cybersecurity field, in the cybersecurity sector for offensive cybersecurity, which had some negative effects on the cyber industry, and it have eventually come to some sort of equilibrium. But I think it will be much more challenging here. So I completely hear the question, and it is a challenge. I mean, it would have to make the defense industries either invest in human resources, so in having the best developers in-house, right? Or actually acquiring these technologies as a whole, but this is a very expensive effort, and the competition is not just with other defense OEMs, rather with the general industry. So it makes it much more challenging.
Talking about acquiring or procuring AI systems for defense purposes, the due diligence process from a technical perspective seems interesting to me. I mean, talking about a black box, basically, what the AI model is, how could one offer a product, a service, and the underlying technology, giving the comfort to the purchaser or to a national governmental actor, whilst on the other hand, keeping trade secrets secrets to the greatest possible extent, just if the deal does not materialize. I mean, any takes on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I hear you. I mean, it's a big challenge. I'm not sure that I have
So no full disclosure, maybe even, yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe full accountability on the side of the user in the very
Yeah.
end. AI systems going rogue, and could also be criminal
Yeah.
sanctions in the very end. Also
Yeah.
warfare, not a legal vacuum, of
Right.
course.
And by the way, we've seen this also in the cybersecurity,
Same.
industry. So we've seen cyber defense, private sector cyber, offensive cyber developers that wanted to engage state actors, but then were afraid, right, that the technology would be used in a sense that would expose them directly to liability. These are,
Absolutely. I'm thinking of AI systems in cybersecurity for critical infrastructure, for example, which is also touched upon by the EU AI Act, by the way. But this is also certainly a very, very sensitive area, and again, putting all eggs in one basket in this respect could be very risky, actually, to the infrastructure providers.
Mhm.
Looking at the questions, another one pops in. I think, it's clearly directed towards Michael. What Europe can learn from Singapore's evolving AI landscape? What is your take on that?
Yeah, that's Singapore is very unique in a way. It's a very small state where it has a very distinct security conditions and environment, right? But it's basically in the middle of a geopolitical fault line. So if you take the fault line, for Asian security that starts at the Korean Peninsula, so you have a Korean Peninsula, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and you have a Malacca Strait, which is Singapore, and then that fault line goes all the way to India, Pakistan, and and India and China in the Himalayas. So you have that fault line, and Singapore stands as a small little tiny island, the red dot, on that fault line, and it doesn't have any alliances. It refuses to be, in alliance. So it has no choice, or in a sense, similar to Israel in a way, but to depend on itself. And for the last, I would say, 60 years. This year will be 60 years of Singapore's, founding. They have, went through several military modernization waves where, they try to build up their capabilities, and not only on that, but they try to bring together the industry, the users and the militaries, together. So there is a very tight, ecosystem, and that's something that the Europeans, need to learn, because in Europe it's very, very fragmented. You have the defense industry in one corner, you have the government on the other corner, you have the academia, the startups. They're all very, very fragmented. And because of that fragmentation, that sort of precludes, the streamlining of innovation and other issues. So the smaller you are, the more agile you are, and the more you're able to basically, implement the feedback loops from the militaries, what the militaries want, to the research and development, what the academias and research institutes like my university provides, all right, and tied with the policy that and the government, that sets its direction. And so I think the defense ecosystem that Singapore has in a way developed and is still working on, right, integrates these elements in much more synergistic, in a way where what I do has some impact on, on how the government and policymakers think, and I understand what they need, and then we sit down together and figure out a way, to solve a particular problem, or set a direction. So that's lesson number one. Number two is continuous sustained resource allocation. So Singapore doesn't fluctuate defense budgets, right? It doesn't basically go from here to there. It has a very long-term view, sort of horizon scanning, long-term view, and continuously allocates, the same level, or if not more, of defense resources each and every year. So if European countries are not able to do that because of socioeconomic demands, again, that precludes, sort of more major military modernization and provides challenges. The third factor, I think, what Singapore is very, keen of, is really understanding the long-term challenges and having that long-term strategic outlook, and understanding, if what could possibly happen, and if what we need to, prevent or mitigate this risk. So long-term future horizon scanning is embedded. Every unit, every ministry has a sort of long-term horizon scanning unit, which they try to leverage on, and we try to sort of provide inputs. So those are just three, I think, some of the three key areas where I think the Singaporean defense ecosystem is very unique. But I think at the end of the day, it works. It's very efficient and is a long-term, outlook, and it has a very continuous, sustained resource allocation that enables to implement a lot of these ideas in practice, and and plug and play with what the militaries actually needs.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. And I assume this is not too far away, maybe of Israel's approach to things in that respect. We are approaching our end. It is on me to thank you, the audience, and our speakers for this dynamic and insightful discussion. I think today's conversation made somewhat clear that the AI wave in defense is not just about an emerging technology. It's a fundamental shift in how nations think about security, sovereignty, and strategic autonomy. From Singapore's agile innovation model to Israel's operational integration and agile business, AI tech business, basically, to Europe's regulatory leadership. At least we have seen that the challenges and the opportunities are global, but the paths forward may differ. As we move forward, let's not just now ask what, so to say, AI can do for defense, but what kind of defense we want AI to serve, actually. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Omri.